Good evening. Shalom. Peace be unto you. Welcome to all that come in. It's your sister Shaya, the historian, back with another story time. We are continuing to read The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of Earth by Monica Stew and Barbara Moore. We left off on women as culture creators, and I'm just going to jump right in. When we say that women created most of early human culture, we are not trying to sound radical. The evidence is there, quite tangible. When we realize how many basic life industries were the inventions of women: cooking, food processing and storage, ceramics, weaving, textiles and design, tanning and dyeing, everything related to fire, chemistry, and metallurgy. The medicinal arts, language itself, and the first scripts and glyphs, grain domestication, animal domestication, religious imagery and ritual, domestic and sacred architecture, the first calendars, and the origins of astronomy, and on, then we don't need to project our imaginations far back into the past to confirm these inventions. They are still all around us today. They constitute our world. Stolen and mechanized by several thousand years of patriarchal exploitation, most of these inventions have been turned into grossly alienated and profiteering mass market industries. We do not have to use our imaginations to remember that all were once warm, personal, and lovingly tended arts and crafts, originated and sustained by early communities of women. This information is radical in the true sense of the word. Radical came from radix, root, and means going to the root of things. These cultural inventions of early women were at the very root of human existence. They created what we know as human life. Evelyn Reed, an anthropologist, Marxist, and feminist, has written extensively about women's early social forms and inventions. In The Myth of Women's Inferiority and Woman's Evolution, Reed describes how human culture developed out of women's labor groups, interrelations, and first crafts. It was the female of the species who had the care and responsibility of feeding, tending, and protecting the young. However, as Marx and Engels have demonstrated, all societies, both past and present, are founded upon labor. So it was not simply the capacity of women to give birth and played the decisive role, for all females give birth. What was decisive for the human species was the fact that maternity led to labor. It was in the fusion of maternity and labor that the first human social system was founded. It was women who became the chief producers, the workers and farmers, the leaders in scientific, intellectual, and cultural life. In the language of primitive peoples, the term mother is identical with producer, procreatrix. It was a society where power was linked with real love. Among the earliest examples of Stone Age peoples found living today, such as the Kalahari Bushmen and the Bambuti Pygmies of Africa, the same linkage occurs. Female authority is valued, and both sexes are mothers to the young. Contrary to the bloody tooth and claw theories of popular aggression-oriented anthropologists, evidence shows that the farther back we go in human history, the gentler our species was. This is because the early matrifocal groups were concentrated on maintaining rather than exploiting life. Evelyn Reed shows that during the food gathering epoch, stretching over hundreds of thousands of years, the human group's main nourishment was supplied by the women collectors, who dug the earth for edible roots, plants, and grubs, collected fruits and nuts, and hunted such small animals as lizards and hares. Large game hunting kept the men away for long periods of time and didn't always bring in enough meat. Among hunting and gathering people today, the women's food collecting activities provide 75% to 85% of their group's daily nourishment. Over these thousands of years of food gathering, women's keen knowledge of herbs and plant properties was developed through trial and error, testing, and practical experience into the arts of medicinal healing. Ultimately, women's food collecting developed into agriculture as women observed the relation between scattered seeds and plant growth. This female invention, based on generations of experimentation with seed cultivation, cutting and grafting, and grain storage, brought about the vast Neolithic revolution circa 10,000 BC. The women's digging sticks were humanity's first tools, and women's work the prototype for all the industry that followed. Much of the small game that women hunted and snared was brought back alive to the camp. Sometimes the young of animals killed by the male hunters was captured and brought back alive too. These animals were often kept as pets and provided the first experiments in animal training and domestication, which finally led to stock breeding. Motherless animal young often suckled the women's breasts, as captured bear cubs do today among the Ainu of Japan. So even the domestication of animals had its roots in women's maternity. Later, cattle breeding became an extremely male-oriented activity like so many others, but originally it was women's. Among the ancient Arabs, women not only made and owned the family tents, they also owned the herds. World myths, folk traditions, and anthropological studies agree that women first discovered how to use and produce fire. In a survey of 224 modern tribal societies, it was found that fires were made and tended always or usually by women in 84 societies. Almost all these societies have legends telling of the early times when women were the exclusive owners of fire. Ritual maintenance of fire remained entrusted to women down through historic times, such as the Vestal Virgins of ancient Rome or the Irish nuns of St. Bridget from the originally Celtic goddess Bridget or Bride, who tended a perpetual fire at Kildare until the suppression of the monasteries under Henry VIII. Fire is sacred to the Moon Mother. Cooking, boiling, roasting, baking, steaming was only one of the techniques women acquired from their mastery of directed heat. Fire was the tool of tools. Through its use, foods could be dried and conserved for future use, and some poisonous plants and fruits made edible. It was women who developed all the early associated industries of cooking and ceramics, in which fire was the critical tool. Women Cultures, 1977. Women built the first granaries and storehouses for provisions. Some of these were sunk into the earth, while on marshy ground they were upraised on stilts. Women domesticated the cat to protect these granaries from rodents. Cats, since immemorial time, have had a special relationship with women. Among European witches, cats acted as familiars and were believed to have telepathic powers, which is why special bonfires were erected during the Inquisition to burn all the cats in town along with the women. Industry, science, and human need were combined in women's work, and the daily tasks were infused with magical meaning. Women converted plants and herbs into medicines. Some substances discovered by women are still used today for their narcotic properties. And World Health Organization figures show that 95% of the world's healthcare today is still provided by women using many of these ancient remedies. Women designed and produced containers and vessels out of materials like wood, bark, fibers, and leather. Fire was used to hollow out wood, a technique that could then be used to make canoes and boats from tree trunks. All these tremendous discoveries were related to daily survival, yet they were also experienced as magic transformations of raw material into something completely different, especially through the alchemy of fire. Consider the chemistry of bread making. the planting of the seed and its growth through combinations of moon, sun, rain, and tilled earth, the careful harvesting and grinding the grain into flour, then with the correct combination of water, yeast, and fire, the original seed is transformed into bread, the human food. The original beehive shaped or domed ovens found all over the world could be used only by women. The oven was seen symbolically as the belly of the great goddess. Many miniature pottery models have been found in Southeast Europe depicting Neolithic shrines. In the shrines, there are ovens, clay altars, originally covered with wooden planks, horned thrones, figurines of women worshippers, and wall images showing rain symbols and the magical grinding of grain. In these regions, there are still women's rituals of celebration involving the sacred New Year bread dough, which is held communally in the upraised arms of the elder women of the group. The textile industries also originated in women's work. Women developed cordage techniques, the weaving of bark and grass fibers into baskets and textiles. Women were the leather makers, tanning and working the skins, softening the skins by chewing them, as the polar Eskimos still do. The skin scraper, along with the digging stick, was a woman's tool everywhere and is so still among the Eskimo people. The cured leather was then made into tents, clothes, boots, straps, and cords. These were brightly ornamented with vegetable and mineral dyes, another complex chemical process invented by women. Women were everywhere the first potters. In World of the Maya, archaeologist Victor W. Von Hagen writes, pottery was woman. All we see of the remains of the Maya ceramic art was done by women. It is a fact that should be stressed. In almost every place where pottery making was on an archaic level, Africa or Melanesia, pottery was woman made and its design woman inspired. Throughout the area of the Amazon, pottery was a woman's task. Women were the potters, so far as we know, in ancient Peru. Early Greek and early Egyptian pottery was also woman made until the introduction of the potter's wheel. Sir Lindsay Scott is certain that it was only after the introduction of the potter's wheel that pottery became, as the drawings on the walls of Thebes shows, exclusively masculine. This suggests that all the superbly beautiful patterns found on pottery, as well as weaving, were conceived by women. Perhaps then art is a woman. Pot making involved the creation of entirely new substances that did not already exist in nature. The beginnings of pottery are unknown, insofar as the first pots were unbaked and didn't survive. But the earliest fired ceramics found so far, including fine burnished and painted wares, date from the late 7th millennium BC. These already reveal a mastery of ceramic technology, mixing special kinds of earth with water in exactly the right proportions, molding a piece of clay into a shape, then heating it to over 600 degrees Celsius in ovens or kilns built by the women. The change must have seemed a magic transmutation from dust or mud into a substance almost as hard and durable as stone, and a substance made with water that could hold water. Women decorated their pots, the coloring changing with the firing process. Art developed out of the potter's craft, and out of the pottery decorations developed, there is little doubt, the written language. Some pots were used for daily life, others for ritual purposes. Sacred pots were painted with mystic symbols that became standardized over millennia, and these acted as a kind of shorthand language understood by all. Among the people, there was a common understanding of the commonly held mythic tradition. Material fact and ritual activity were shared daily between the women who made the pots and those who used them. The artist could therefore communicate abstractly through the magic signs, and over the ages, these symbols evolved into glyphs and then character or phonetic scripts. Graphic designs, ideograms, were used for thousands of years in old Neolithic Europe. Marija Gimbutas in Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, 6500 through 3500 BC, says that there were two categories of ideograms, those signifying water and rain, zigzag V's, zigzags, chevrons, meanders, and spirals, all related to the snake and bird goddess, and those related to the moon, to becoming, to the vegetal life cycle, the rotation of the seasons, the birth and growth essential to life. These moon signs were the cross, the encircled cross, signifying the four quarters of the world, the year as a journey embracing the four cardinal directions of the cosmic cycle, the crescent, the horns, the caterpillar, the egg, and the fish. All were symbols of the continuum of life, which the ideograms were meant to ensure, and of the great moon goddess of life and death, of cosmos, earth, and vegetation. The horns, the lunar crescent, and the cross were all originally alternative symbols for the waxing and waning moon. Sequences of inscribed linear signs have also been found. These are a form of very ancient and until recently unknown Neolithic Chalcolithic script dating from circa 5000 BC, which is 2000 years before the development of Sumerian literate civilization. According to male historical tradition, the earliest examples of written language were found at the Temple of the Queen of Heaven in Erech, which was the sacred city of the Sumerian goddess. These were clay tablets inscribed about 5,000 years ago. But even then, the goddess at Erech had long been known as the inventor of clay tablets. Clay was sacred to women and the goddess of language and of the original alphabet or picture script. It is known that a special sacred language was used by women initiates of the goddess until late in Neolithic time. In 1973, the Peruvian ethnologist Dr. Victoria de la Jara proved to a Congress for Andean archaeology at Lima that the Incas had a script. She spent 10 years doing research on the geometrical patterns of Inca pottery and urns, and had come to the conclusion that these patterns were in fact characters with a content ranging from the simple to the highly complex. They were language symbols relating historical events, myths, and poetry, with a grammar based on groupings of complementary colors. Generations of male scholars had claimed that the Incas had used no language script. In fact, they were not looking in the right place or in the right way. The first speech. Did women also develop the spoken language? From the earliest hunting and gathering times, we know that the men spent long, silent, and often solitary days away on the hunt. It takes silence to track animals. Meanwhile, the women worked collectively in or near the camp, surrounded by children, talking and singing. Language must have developed in the first intimate relations between mother and child, and between women working together for the kin group's daily sustenance. Alexander Marshak, renegade student of the Paleolithic period, has already proposed the thesis that human speech developed not among male hunters, but in a childhood setting among females working together. We can't go back in time to confirm this thesis, but we can confirm its probability by looking around us at everyday life and at the development of individual speech. As William Irwin Thompson writes, food sharing in a home base sets up the ideal conditions for communication, babbling, clowning, and play. We've all seen how speech begins for each human child in this home atmosphere of babble and play. Sound communication begins between mother and child, and at the very beginning, during the intense gazing between them in the days after birth. Thompson refers to recent studies of newborns, 1 or 2 days old, who move their arms and legs in rhythmic synchrony with the pulse of their mother's words. The newborn is literally dancing to language before she or he can utter a word. Even earlier, the child in the womb can hear its mother's voice and comes to recognize it a few months before birth. We also know that growing girls of all cultures and linguistic backgrounds are much more language proficient than boys of the same age. Finally, many mothers have the strong feeling that following birth, it is speech that takes the place of the umbilical cord. It is speech that continues to bind us quite viscerally to the growing child, and through which passes the social food of instruction, warning, and communication with a growing consciousness. It makes sense that we women who give birth to human life through our sexual or vaginal mouths would also give birth to human language through our social or facial mouths. What kind of language? Thompson has a fascinating idea that women's plant collecting activities were related to the development of a kind of mental vocabulary dictionary and classification system. The gathering of useful plants is an exercise in establishing a cultural taxonomy of nature, precisely that kind of activity likely to establish a list and a grammar of discrete items. Plant gathering women would be involved in highly detailed tabulations of various plant and herbal properties. What is edible? What is poison? What is medicinal? What is hallucinogenic? And in transferring this information on to others. Over generations, an incredibly complex and replete botanic and pharmacopoeic catalog would be filed in each female mind. If you are a male hunter, it is not too hard to tell the difference between a mammoth and an elk. If you are a female food or medicine gatherer, the distinction between a poisonous and a non-poisonous mushroom, or between two varieties of herb, one toxic and one curative, can be very subtle, requiring most minute observation and a lot of educated guessing. A mistake could be lethal for many loved ones. So Thompson's observation makes sense. An important part of women's early language use would be a detailed observation and classification of the floral and mineral environment, an experimental classification that was the origin of science. But no women, Stone Age to Rock Age, ever lived by head alone. The constant pattern of women's existence has been the need and the talent to link mental activity with physical activity with emotional activity, all encircled in these beginning times with the aura of spiritual activity. So, early women's scientific language, because that's what plant gathering is, a science, would be uttered side by side with the emotional language of social relations and the physical language of the body moving through daily tasks. And surrounding all of these would be the symbol language of sexual spiritual celebration. The first symbols did not arise from the mind alone, but from the holistic experiencing of mind, body, sex, heart, soul, and world all moving together, all one. This is the dream body language of women's ancient rituals. Dream body language is the deepest type of thinking. It is right brain thinking. It is the thinking of magic and poetry, in which left brain language is used for nonlinear, non-logical expression, and it is a mode of perception and power that Western culture has scorned to its own harm. A good deal of Robert Graves' research into the defeat of Mediterranean and European matriarchy by patriarchy focuses on the suppression by male linear logic of the earlier synthetic holistic language process. Graves says in The White Goddess, the language of poetic myth, anciently current in the Mediterranean and Northern Europe, was a magical language bound a magical language bound up with popular religious ceremonies in honor of the moon goddess or muse, some of them dating from the Old Stone Age, and this remains the language of true poetry. The language was tampered with in late Minoan times when invaders from Central Asia began to substitute patrilinear for matrilinear institutions and remodel or falsify the myth to justify the social changes. Then came the early Greek philosophers who were strongly opposed to magical poetry as threatening their new religion of logic, and under their influence, a rational poetic language, now called the classical, was elaborated in honor of their patron Apollo and imposed on the world as the last word in spiritual illumination, a view that has prevailed practically ever since in European schools and universities, where myths are now studied only as quaint relics of the nursery age of mankind. Once again, this academic contempt of myth and magic poetry is analogous to the attitudes of psychoanalysts and Christian theologians toward what they call primitive or infantile or pagan through thought processes. But in fact, it is this nursery age, guarded, led, and elaborated by women that all the basic inventions essential to human culture were born. And these primary industries, tools, arts, medicines, daily objects, and alchemic processes did not arise from the logic centers of the brain alone, but were the products of dream thinking, of holographic thinking, of mythic, ritual, and poetic communication between women and their environment. Man's hard-headed, pragmatic civilizations have been living off these first enchanted female inventions ever since. Poetic thinking is non-dualistic. Paradox and ambiguity are not exorcised as illogical demons, but are felt and synthesized. The most ancient becomes the most modern, for in the holographic universe, each subjective part contains the objective whole, and chronological time is just one aspect of a simultaneous universe. Subjective and objective merge into an experience of cosmic oneness. Such a thought mode, of course, does not build huge political and corporate empires like Rome or General Motors. For these purposes, men have devised a language of logical precision in which words can be used like knives to chop up one's continuous life into mechanically unrelated parts, in which the visible, for example, the intellectually possessible dimension, is stressed at the expense of the oral, tactile, affective, and mystic dimensions. With such a partial language, all kinds of destructive manipulations are possible against the earth and her creatures and against the psyche itself. Rationalistic language is used to make lying, exploiting, enslaving, torturing, and murdering seem nice and legal, not to mention God's will and great material progress. The languages of primitive peoples, though not written, are as complex as the languages of literate peoples. Pre-literate peoples' brains are in no way inferior to the brains of the civilized. In fact, their memories and powers of concentration are much stronger. No African bushman or Australian Aboriginal child could ever be dismissed as having only a 10-minute attention span, as teachers characterize American school children today. But primal people do see the world in a different way. The practical and the sacred are not separated by the knife of logic. The individual soul is not severed from the world womb of the mother. And this is where we all began. What has happened to us? Our primordial and practical, material, magical perception of oneness between ourselves and the universe is the innate female state, which in this modern patriarchal world we are all supposed to grow out of in order to become men. In the place of our ancient female mode of being, now referred to as primitive animism, the academic psychotherapists, God logicians, existential poetry technicians and new car salesmen offer us their own product called the agony of alienation, otherwise known as everyday life, which you can fix temporarily by buying something. This is how they talk. Man has struggled for centuries to free his divine spirit from the paralyzing fetters of the material cosmos, or in his mind, he is disembodied. Imagination, the mother of human memory and creative mental powers, is assigned to the female realms, to biology and childhood. Jehovah, Socrates, modern hardware, and the GMP bid men to leave these picture forming but infantile habits of the soul and turn to quote unquote abstract thought. As men, we are to be given new enterprise, her energies and resources used to realize his thought forms and achieve his goals. The earth, the body, the soul, and the imagination will be allowed to survive only as handmaidens of the great male mind up in the sky. So the patriarchs have been talking in their religions, their philosophies, their physical sciences, their politics and economics, their behavioral and psychoanalytical systems for over 2,000 years. What are they really saying? We have only to look around us to see his visions for us: robots, computer hearts, satellite missiles, ground zero, cruising nuclear penises targeting cities in barbecue wire bondage. Our flesh has never been good enough for him. His babies are all quite metalloid. And these are our new bodies and our new worlds. He has so abstracted himself from the female imagination and the cosmic material fetters of Mother Nature that he is just about to blast himself entirely out of the picture, and everything with him. Abstract thought, after all, was the condition of the universe before the female imagination began its childish picture forming activity. Another word for it is entropy, the static show on the TV screen in the absence of an image. Will we get a glimpse of his ultimate flesh free vision of ourselves just as he and his boys push the final button? As we get to watch ourselves, the world, and everything in it dematerialize before our eyes, courtesy of his advanced anal technology. For the ultimate filling of the master or male mind for his servant or female nature is not love but necrophilic contempt, and the apotheosis of contempt is a brutal will toward total annihilation. So, how did we get here? On the ground level of being, the average adult member of a hunting and gathering culture, even in some environments called sparse by our standards, worked only 15 hours a week to fill sustenance needs. The rest of the time was spent in leisure activity, arts and crafts, spiritual ecstasy, running, swimming, making love, laughing, eating, goofing around. In our advanced Western culture, the average male's work week is 45 hours. The average female's is 77 hours. A lot of people seem to be working more and more and enjoying it less. The unemployed and underemployed are working less and enjoying it less. Certainly, there is less joy, grace, creativity, and wonder in our average daily life than there is in the daily experience of the average Kalahari Bushman or Australian outback Martukuja, those who are left. We don't have to prove this statement. We believe we all know somewhere deep in our beings that it is so. Modern existence in the long run profits very few at the expense of too many. So how did we get here and how do we get out? Women's early religion. The first mother. Biology is not destiny, but like the sea, it is a beginning. The mysteries of female biology dominated human religious and artistic thought, as well as social organization, for at least the first 200,000 years of human life on Earth. The first human images known to us are the so-called Venuses found in Upper Paleolithic remains, 35,000 through 10,000 BC. From the way these statues are positioned and located in cave hearths, niches, and graves, they are interpreted as cult images, the mother guardians of the daily life, death, and rebirth of the people. These Venuses, carved from stone, bone, and ivory, and shaped from clay, are very fleshy, more or less stylized to represent pregnancy and abundance. Though named after Venus, the Roman goddess of love, they are no longer seen by archaeologists as Cro-Magnon bunnies. They are not sex objects. They are magic images of the mysterious power of the female to create life out of herself and to sustain it. The statues have no feet. The legs taper to a point, so they could be stuck upright in a soft hearth or niche. They were placed everywhere. These statues appear in Europe with the appearance of the Cro-Magnons, but much earlier, during the Neanderthaloid period, dating from at least 200,000 BC, evidence shows that great magical power was attributed to the earth as mother of life and death. Neanderthals buried their dead, curled in fetal position, painted red. Bones were painted with red ochre. Analogically, the dead were to re-enter the earth, the tomb, the womb, to be reborn again. A Neanderthal corpse found in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq had been laid to rest on pine boughs and strewn with wild flowers. Even earlier than this, a remarkable find at La Pharisee in the French limestone country shows the beautiful resonance that was felt in the minds and hearts of these earliest people between life, death, and the mother. In a rock shelter, a child's grave was found covered with a large stone slab. On the underside of this slab, small cupules had been scooped out. These were all in pairs to symbolize the mother's breast. These breast-shaped cupule markings were made throughout prehistory. They are found over great areas of outcrop rock in Europe, but on this stone slab in France, covering a Neanderthal's child's grave, is where they first appear. Mircea Eliade, the great student of Aboriginal religious symbolism and shamanism, speaks of a primary intuition of the earth as a religious form. The earth was seen by all primal people as the source of nourishment, protection, power, and the mystery of cyclic reoccurrence or recurrence. Perhaps the first human analogy made was between the earth and the female, who performed the same functions on an individual level. Especially awesome was the woman's ability to bleed rhythmically with the moon's phases and her periodic swelling up and dramatic expulsion of a new being. Paintings of the mother giving birth, with the exposed child still connected to her via the umbilical cord, are found throughout the Cro-Magnon caves. Childbirth is a powerful drama and ritual. To imagine the enormous impact of pregnancy and childbirth on our human ancestors, we have to remember that Paleolithic people, like many Aboriginal people today, did not know the connection between intercourse and pregnancy. The male role might have been seen as opening the womb, but the pregnancy itself was seen as resulting from a magical intercourse between the mother and the spirit world, or it was seen as a parthenogenetic act, the woman as spontaneous and autonomous creator of life. In these cave drawings of childbirth and in the Venus statues, as well as in many images of gravid animals, the fertility of earth and woman was imaged and celebrated as a spiritual, magical act to ensure the year's abundance of game and fruit. The seasonal return of vegetation and young animal life following winter and apparent death gave early humans the idea of a magical cyclical rebirth of their own kind. Entombments, whether cave graves or the later underground vaults and collective burial mounds, were ways of returning bodies to the womb of Mother Earth, where they waited for rebirth. In the later megalithic porthole tombs, holes were laboriously chiseled out of the portal slabs at the grave entrance to simulate the birth canal opening. Even later in Egypt, the overarching sky goddess Nut was painted on the inside of coffin lids. This is a lovely echo of that first stone slab placed over the Neanderthal grave, with the mother's breast protectively covering and nourishing the dead child as it waited to be reborn. Death is the powerful, dramatic mystery equal to birth, and both are overarched and contained by the Great Mother. This concept of a female earth as the source of cyclic birth, life, death, and rebirth underlies all mythological and religious symbology. It is the source of all religious belief. It is important. It is the source of all religious belief. It is important to grasp the time dimension involved. God was female for at least the first 200,000 years of human life on Earth. This is a conservative estimate. Wooden images of the mother god were doubtless carved long before the stone Cro-Magnon Venuses, but wood does not survive. And long before those first breast shapes were carved in the Neanderthal grave slab, or the red ochred bodies were placed fetal position in the cave earth, the idea, the symbolic image, the resonant analogy preceding all icons was in the minds and hearts of our earliest ancestors. Cosmos within her womb, 1971. In the world's oldest creation myths, the female god creates the world out of her own body. The Great Mother everywhere was the active and autonomous creatrix of the world, and unlike the aloof and self-righteous patriarchal gods who only recently usurped her mountain throne, the ancient goddess was always there, alive, immanent within her creation. No ontological scapegoater, she was wholly responsible for both the pain and the good of life. Here is one of the oldest world creation myths from Northwest India. At first, Kujam Shanta, the earth, was like a human being. She had a head and arms and legs and an enormous fat belly. The original human beings lived on the surface of her belly. One day it occurred to Kujam Shanta that if she ever got up and walked about, everyone would fall off and be killed. So she herself died of her own accord. Her head became the snow-covered mountains. The bones of her back turned into smaller hills. Her chest was the valley where the Apatanis live. From her neck came the north country of the Najans. Her buttocks turned into the Assam plain. For just as the buttocks are full of fat, Assam has fat-rich soil. Kujam Shantu's eyes became the sun and moon. From her mouth was born Kujam Popi, who sent the sun and moon to shine in the sky. Mount Everest in nearby Nepal was only recently affixed with the name of a 19th century British surveyor. In reality, this tallest breast of earth was always known by the native people who lived with her as Shomo Lungma, Mother Mountain of the universe. The organic religion of early women. The first god, Mother Earth, was a human concept or the sign of a human response to an experienced fact. The first arts and religions, the first crafts and social patterns were designed in recognition and celebration of her. But what were real human females feeling and thinking? We can only see the attributes of the great goddess as the projections of women's experiences of themselves. As we read the powerful magic signs of the Great Mother's celebration, we can read these first women's powerful discoveries and celebrations of themselves. The religious beliefs, the mysteries, and rites developed by ancient women grew organically out of women's supreme roles as cultural producers, mothers, and prime communicators with the spirit world. The mysteries of creation, transformation, and recurrence, the primal mysteries of all religions, emerged from women's direct physical and psychic experiences of these mysteries in bleeding, in growing a child, in nursing and working with fire, in making a pot, in planting a seed. In pottery, craft, and myth alone, we can see the development of a religion. The pot was seen to have the body shape and internal womb of the mother. In Neolithic Europe, clay was said to have a woman's soul, and no man was allowed to see the female potter at work. Clay, as sacred to women and the goddess, was often marked with the maze like windings of the magic underworld, a place of transformation. Aruru Ishtar, the cosmic creatrix of Babylon, was imaged as a potter, a divine potter, shaper of life. The making of cult vessels was like this shaping of life, and the Babylonian words for rebirth were, "We are as fresh baked pots." From this, we can see the absurdity and the political co-optation of the notion of a male godfather making human beings from clay or dust. The biblical image is stolen without shame from the earlier Sumerian and Babylonian goddess creation stories. Such a patriarchal version of creation is very recent. The facts of women's experience of life are primordial. It is woman who goes through the sacred transformations in our own body and psyche, the mystery changes of menstruation, pregnancy, birth, and the production of milk. It is woman who first shaped a seed into food, earth into pottery, fire into a tool, the struggle for survival into human culture. Women as procreator and producer creator. Women's mysteries are blood transformation mysteries. The experience of female bodily transformations magically fused with her conscious and willed transformations of matter. Matter, the mud, the mother, she transforms herself. Religious rites were combined with industry. Women's religions were organic, a unity of body and spirit, of daily life task as cosmic meaning. Among the women weavers of the matrifocal Navajo, for example, this is still so. The women experience themselves as being directly inspired by the great spider woman, the original weaver of the universe. They use no set patterns and feel no separation between art, sacred, and craft, secular or profane. The woven blankets are valued as organic expressions of the special powers of the makers. Each blanket, with its inspired design, has a spiritual significance and is thought of as giving power and protection to the person who wears it. In ancient textiles, a highly charged symbol language was used to communicate her story and myth. Spinning and weaving were imbued with magic powers, and inscribed spindle whorls are found in innumerable Neolithic sacrificial pits sacred to the goddess. The Greek Artemis was seen to spin the thread of life, and the three Norns of Scandinavian mythology sat spinning the web of life, destiny, fate at the roots of Yggdrasil, the cosmic world tree. The subtle energy form of the human body may be seen as a subtle energy form of cosmos, relatively miniaturized, but no less vast and totally alive. The cosmos that we know is a construction, perception, projection of the energy currents in our own bodily systems. Cosmic mind and human mind are not essentially different or separate, nor are cosmic body and human body. Everything is interconnected in a vast webwork of cosmic being, a universal weaving in which each individual thing or life form is a kind of energy knot or interlock in the overall vibrating pattern. The Latin root word for religion is religare, which means a bond, a binding back to something. Yoga, interestingly enough, means the same thing, a yoke or yoking of the individual soul to the all. William Irwin Thompson writes, the sacred is the emotional force which connects the part to the whole. The profane or the secular is that which has been broken off from or has fallen from its emotional bond to the universe. Religare means to bind up, and the traditional task of religion has been to bind up the pieces that have been broken away from the ecstatic oneness. True religion is the original umbilical cord that binds our individual selves back to our larger universal source. That source in women's religion is the Great Mother, who is the great cosmic weaver, the divine potter, the carrier of the heavenly water jar. We participate in her substance, her nature, her processes, her play, and her work. In her are both the lower regions of the tomb, the world of the dead, and the upper regions of the celestial sky, whose stars are her eyes. Groundwater belongs to the belly womb region of the lower female. The heavenly rainwater belongs to the great breast region of the upper female. As the belly womb region of the lower female, the heavenly rainwater belongs to the great, as divine water jar, she is mistress of the upper waters, the rain, and of the lower waters, the brooks, springs, and rivers flowing from the womb of the earth. The Egyptian sky and water jar goddess Nut nourishes the earth with her milky rain. In fact, our word galaxy comes from the Greek galaxias, meaning milky circle. And the Milky Way describes the thick white stream of stars pouring from her breast. As uterus, she is a vessel that breaks with childbirth, pouring forth water like a wellspring. These are all symbols of creative life and an ecstatic participation in it. The self-representation of the goddess is a form of divine epiphany, and the parts of her body are not understood literally as physical organs, but as numinous centers of whole spheres of life. Her navel is the center of the earth of us, from which the universe is nourished by our conscious participation, as we are nourished by it. Such symbolism expresses the non-dualistic poetic mind of ancient women who could experience their bodies as whole worlds or universes and the universe as their own body. Ecstasy is the dance of the individual with the all. Ecstasis means standing outside one's self, and so canceling out the conditioned mind. All life was experienced as partaking of a material spiritual wholeness that was her. In this magic unity, ecstasy and responsibility, i.e., responsiveness, were one. And so the earliest communicators with her of her essence were ecstatic women, shamans, and seers. In their trance states, they were responsible for keeping the energy channels open and flowing between each individual, the group, and the cosmic source. They healed, balanced, and translated the life forces from one energy manifestation to another. It is significant that to this day, within almost all the patriarchal world religions, women's robes are still the official priestly garb, and male priests function as a kind of male mother to the believers. Among the Siberian tribes, male shamans have always worn ornamental and symbolic breasts on their robes. When civilized men became the moralistic priests of the new father god, women and pagans of both sexes remained the shamans, the witches of the ecstatic mother. The reality implicit in the universe, in each one of us, in the self at the heart of being, is her way. It is very ancient and has no time. My me is God, nor do I know myself save in her. Ecstasy is the only way through which the soul can lose itself in union with her. Some male mystics have also understood this. Martin Buber describes prenatal life as the original state of ecstatic consciousness within a sexual spiritual universe, a flowing toward each other, a bodily reciprocity. The mother's womb is a condensed experience of the cosmos. At birth, we forget this undivided world, but we never forget completely. The memory lingers as a secret image of a wish, a desire for total reintegration, and this is the real meaning of the human longing to return to the womb. It is not at all a sign of pathology or inadequacy, not a backward craving, but an urge to expand, to reestablish the cosmic connection. Contemporary researchers have found neurological connections between religious or trance experience and female sexuality. In women's brains, there are unique neural links between the forebrain and the cerebellum, or the cerebrum, which allows sensations of physical pleasure to be directly integrated into the neocortex or high brain center. This explains why some women experience orgasms so intense that they enter religious trance or altered states of consciousness. And this ecstatic female orgasmic experience, in which the physical and the spiritual are fused and realized as one, is at the core of all mystical experience. This is why in the original religion of the Great Mother, body and mind and spirit are always integrated. Because human male brains do not seem to have these neurological connections, just as human male sexuality has not evolved radically beyond primate sexuality, while human females, through the shift from estrus to menstrual cycles, have evolved a non-reproductive sexual capacity that functions primarily for affectional bonding. The researchers conclude that it is women who must take the lead in further human evolution toward the integration of the conscious and the unconscious mind, and to a more profound understanding of the spiritual nature of the species. Universal Creation, Sheila Najish, 1978. What these modern researchers are now discovering is something ancient women always knew: the warring dualisms of matter versus spirit, the hostile antagonisms of sexual body versus religious truth, are recent patriarchal inventions destructively forced on the world and the soul. They had no place at the beginning of things, for they are neither natural nor true. For women, at any rate, they can never be true. And that is why the first religion originated by women was a sexual spiritual religion, the celebration of cosmic ecstasy. Among these early women, though some more receptive psyches might have acted as shamanic trance channels, we can imagine no real leaders, no followers, no hierarchies, just as there was no hierarchic distinction made between ordinary daily tasks and the most exalted rituals, because we can see these women sharing experience as a kind of ecstatic rite in itself. They knew life as an ecstatic rite and as their right to ecstasy. Female cosmology, the creation of the universe. The universe exists as sleeping darkness, unknowable, unknown, wholly immersed in deep sleep. Does the dream in sleep or only when she wakes? Does she dream in sleep or only when she wakes? We know not. She sleeps, and then in her sleep, the divine self appears with passionate creative power. She stirs, dispelling darkness. She who is subtle and full of desire, imperceptible and everywhere, now and eternal, who contains all created beings, wakes, then the world stirs. When she slumbers tranquilly, the universe sinks into sleep. Thus she, the imperishable one, who seems always perishing, always changing, alternatively waking and sleeping, incessantly revivifies and destroys the whole of creation. She is the dark night and the black soil that holds within itself the intense powers of light, the secrets and the forces of all life. She is the mouth, the vagina, the passionate and wise source from which all comes and to which all returns. The black-winged night laid a silver egg, the moon, in the womb of darkness, in the dark waters. The divine one resided in that egg during a whole year. Then she by herself alone divided into two halves, and out of these halves she formed heaven and earth. The most holy one created the world like an embryo. As an embryo grows from the navel, so she began to create the world by the navel. And from there it spread, grew, multiplied in all directions. She was both seed and flower, both primordial and final. The first vibrations of the egg of the world, which unfold to the edges of the universe, are both expanding and contracting, emerging from the source and pulsing outward to disappear into a spherical vortex. The still center, the heart, is the axis of creation. The universal continuum perpetually unfolds, pulses outward, contracts, perpetually spinning through its own center. The egg is a symbol of female creation, female generative energy. At the pole of creation, at the pole of contraction, our universe existed as an invisible point of dark light, of compacted potentia and energy. This was the world egg. The spiral movement that creates a center and a moving continuous whole is also that which, combined with gravitational contraction, creates the solar system and the atom, and on a large scale, the galaxy. Galaxies seem to be created by the inward spiraling of interstellar gas and the outward spiraling of heat. The same vertical laws govern the movements of water, which composes nearly 3/4 of our physical bodies and 3/4 of the physical body of the earth. Water is pure, potential, and unformed matrix from which all life on earth takes its being. Water that is not a thing, but a flow, a dance. It is from the involution of the unformed but forming waters that the egg crystallizes, takes shape by the turning in on itself of energy, of matter, of consciousness. The macrocosmic cyclic and spiraling movements are mirrored in the spiraling cycles of the human microcosm. Our waking and sleeping, our sexuality and solitude, our emotions, our wisdom, our conceptions of time itself, which moves continuously around an unmoved center. All these ideas of the original goddess were incorporated into ancient Hindu belief and are contained within modern physics and physical cosmogony. Within later Hindu thought, the goddess Shakti Kali, joined with the god Shiva, dances the world into creation, continuously orgiastically expanding and contracting together. But the spiral and later the labyrinth are everywhere and from the beginning associated with her original cosmology. All religion and cosmology in all their forms originate in the great laws of life, spiraling around the mystery center of creation. The mysteries of life, birth, and death, violence, love, and beauty. Out of body tearing blood pain comes tenderness in a whisper, said love for created being. In a later Hindu mysticism, the egg is identified as male generative energy. Whenever you come upon something like this, stop and ponder. If it is absurdly inorganic, male gods brooding on the waters or laying eggs, then you know you are in the presence of an original goddess cosmology stolen and displaced by later patriarchal scribes. The Cosmic Serpent. This is a Pelagian creation myth. In the beginning, Uranim, the goddess of all things, rose naked from chaos, but found nothing substantial for her feet to rest upon, and therefore divided the sea from the sky, dancing lonely upon its waves. She danced toward the south, and the wind set in motion behind her seemed as something new and apart with which to begin the work of creation. Wheeling about, she caught hold of this north wind, rubbed it between her hands, and behold, the great serpent, Ophion. Uranim danced to warm herself wildly and more wildly until Ophion, grown lustful, coiled about those divine limbs and was moved to couple with her. So she was with child. The Pelagian myth is much older than Greek legend. Still, it comes from the transition period when the Great Mother is no longer believed to give birth parthenogenically. There is now a perception of the male part in conception. In this myth, Uranim is fertilized by the north wind. The wind is the subtle body of the serpent. It moves its movements through the air. Ultimately, though, she is still seen as the creator of male sexual energy, the generative force of the wind, and the great serpent as an emanation from herself, from her passion and her dance. Great live snakes were everywhere, kept in the goddess's temples during the Neolithic. In wall paintings, bas reliefs, statues, she was often represented carrying snakes in her upraised arms or coiled around her, or she was imaged as a serpent herself with a woman's body and a snake's head. Of one Near Eastern goddess, it was said, Pagets, she who observes the water, who studies the dew from the drop, who knows the courses of the stars. Her heart is like a serpent. The Sumerian goddess was known as the Great Mother Serpent of Heaven, perhaps another image of the Milky Way, the great spiraling galactic arms. Everywhere in world myth and imagery, the goddess creatrix was coupled with the sacred serpent. In Egypt, she was the Cobra Goddess. The use of the cobra in her ceremonies and icons was so ancient that the inscribed picture of a cobra preceded the names of all goddesses and became the hieroglyphic sign for the word goddess. Isis also was pictured as a serpent goddess. Far away in Australia, the Aboriginal goddess Una, who established the earth, was pictured sometimes as three sisters, with the rainbow snake held up in her arms, and this is a Venezuelan creation myth from the native Yaruros. At first there was nothing, then Puana the snake, who came first, created the world and everything in it. Kuma was the first person to people the land. Everything sprang from Kuma, and everything that the Yaruros do was established by her. Australia and Venezuela, the ancient Middle East, the distribution of the goddess and her serpent is global. On South Pacific islands with no snakes, the eel is mythologized. Ancient Celtic and Teutonic goddesses were wrapped with snakes. The Chinese celebrated the dragon power, and the Aztecs and Mayas of Mexico and Central America imaged the feathered serpent or flying snake, a form of dragon. Both the monumental Karnak of Egypt and the mysterious standing stone alignment called Karnak in Brittany are magic snake alignments. Both names mean serpent's mount. When we see this worldwide occurrence of the goddess and her serpent, and then recall the ancient African black goddess, the Black Witch, imaged with the snake in her belly, we can see the profound power as well as universality of this cosmological symbol. Its range of endurance in the human mind. And we begin to see why the upstart patriarchal religions base themselves on the utter destruction of the goddess or serpent, pictured by the Babylonians as primeval chaos, an image picked up later by the Hebrews and used in the biblical Genesis, where Eve linked with her serpent become the symbols of ontological evil. Among patriarchal Hebrews, the serpent was portrayed as Samael, the brother of the evil first woman Lilith. When Old Testament reformers like Hezekiah went around destroying brazen serpents, cult images made of brass as pagan abominations, what they were really doing was attacking the primordial goddess religion followed by all their neighbors. The Hebrew patriarchs tried to destroy the world's original, most widespread and enduring religion by branding it as evil and by portraying the mother goddess and her magic snake lover as the source, not of all life, but of all wickedness. Hated and condemned by their new tribal god, Yahweh. To the degree that they were historically successful in this attempt, Western biblicized peoples have lost their original concept and memory of what the goddess and her serpent really meant to all people and all time. The snake was first of all a symbol of eternal life, like the moon. Since each time it shed its skin, it seemed to be reborn. It represented cosmic continuity within natural change, spiritual continuity within the changes of material life, gliding as it does in and out of holes and caverns in the earth. The serpent also symbolized the underground abode of the dead who wait for rebirth. Its undulations symbolize the serpentine earth currents of the underground waters. The serpent path on earth was the terrestrial energy flow. The serpent path in the sky was the winding spray of stars in the galactic spiral arm or Milky Way. The connection between snakes and birds is evolutionary. The bird species evolved directly out of the reptile species, the shining scales becoming feathers. Some snakes are born alive, but reptiles generally and many snakes lay eggs as birds do. And the egg belongs to the goddess. The formation of the world and of life itself took its beginnings from a double egg, the chromosome, and its polar body, in the midst of which a germ resided, the life embryo. Some of the most ancient Paleolithic engraved and sculpted goddess images show her as a divine water bird with a long, snaky, phallic neck and bearing the cosmic double egg in her protruding buttocks, so expressing in the Upper Stone Age a non-physical reality through these material symbols of becoming. The mystery of earthly life has its origins in water, in oceans, deep lakes and shallow pools, cave grottos, streams, and rivers, in the sea-like pulse and taste of blood. Before a child is born, water flows out of the ruptured womb ocean within the mother. The very ancient bird clawed and horned goddess was born in the womb of the mythical waters. The cosmic egg was created by the cosmic horned lunar snake or laid by a mythic water bird. Both bird and snake vehicles of an energy which has its source, both evolutionary and magical in terrestrial water. She is one, she is two, mistress of waters and of sky and air. In Egypt and Babylon, in Crete, India, and ancient Europe, it was believed that her abode is beyond the upper waters, beyond the meandrous labyrinths. She was ruler over the waters on earth, in the skies, and beyond the clouds, where the primordial waters flow. To represent all this, the bird and snake goddess was pictured. Her body is decorated with snake spirals. Her arms and legs are snakes. Her eyebrows are horned. And the magical source of life, the double egg, lies within her. The goddess was also she who gives life to the dead, aided by her magic serpent, who winds in and out of the earthly tomb womb. The snake, with its stylized image, the spiral, was seen as the vehicle of immortality and the image of spontaneous life energy, its continuous flow. The snake could shed its skin but still live. As the moon birthed herself from her own darkness, and the womb bled periodically without being wounded. All were seen as miraculously interconnected transformations. To the serpent was attributed power that can move the entire cosmos and does. The cosmic snake winds over and around the cosmic egg like a continuous flow of water, of energy. The beginning of life within the egg is caused by the orbiting of two snakes within it, their interaction causing and sustaining a tension field which becomes form. The symbolisms of snake, egg, horns, fish, and doe, along with the female images of vulvas, triangles, spiraling circles, all related to water, originate in Stone Age times. Egg-shaped sculptures with the vulva engraved on them have been dated from circa 6000 BC. The horned rams and bulls of Neolithic ritual were sacrificed to the ancient bird and snake goddess. Maharaja Gimbutas points out that the 6th millennium BC saw centuries of drought, and from this comes an obsession with rain and water symbolism, which is everywhere present in ritual, on vessels, and in ideograms of that time. The snake spiral was the basis of ornamental composition in ancient Europe, its peak expression being circa 5000 BC. So we have here some extremely ancient and mysterious connections or psychic resonances involving snakes, spirals, waters, and the tides. Menstrual periods, the moon, the dead, oracular powers, psychic healing, bisexuality, the magnetic earth current, the womb, the stars, immortality, and ever renewed life. I want to see where they go with this bisexuality thing. You always got to throw that up in there. In Africa, snakes issuing from the nostrils indicated clairvoyant powers, doubtless related to the third eye, the pineal gland behind the nose, and the snake hair of Medusa had the same significance. One legendary historic Medusa was an Amazonian queen in the region of present-day Morocco, Algeria, North Africa. According to Merlin Stone, snake venom injected into people who have previously been immunized against it has highly hallucinogenic qualities. Some venom is chemically similar to mescaline, peyote, or the psilocybin of mushrooms. Reported effects were clairvoyance, extraordinary mental powers, enhanced creativity, prophetic visions, and illumination about the primal processes of existence. As Stone remarks, the sacred snakes kept at the goddess's oracular shrines were perhaps not merely the symbols, but actually the instruments through which the experiences of divine revelation were reached. And so the Egyptian Cobra Goddess was also known as the Lady of Spells. We can be sure the ancient women shamans worldwide were aware of this property of snake venom, and that this was one of the recognized meanings of the snake symbols and images inscribed everywhere. Rudolf Steiner, founder of anthroposophy, spoke of the innate clairvoyant power of ancient humanity, a power lost by modern man, who is now unaware of his primordial connection with universal life and its magic energies. Reduced to a mere mechanism, a physical recording apparatus, he lives in a void of utter loneliness and alienation. For it is precisely the astral lunar region, the psychic world of supersensual perception, called by occultists the astral serpent, which patriarchy tells us to destroy, to overcome in the name of an abstract, static, asexual, hyper-rational, and mechanistic system. Finally, the snake came to symbolize the phallus, male sexual energy, which was understood to be originally contained inside the goddess, born from her and returning to her again, when at the end of each world cycle, expansion, contraction, she curls up in dark sleep. Though Upper Paleolithic images of copulation between women and men occur, icons and myths of the Great Mother do not show her actually mated with a human son lover until Middle Neolithic times, circa 5500 BC. At this time, and especially after the peak period of Catalhuic, there seems to have begun a divorce of male attributes from the mother, and quite a phallic obsession developed, shown in representations of phallic cups, standing phallic stones, and phallic gods, though pictures of shamans in trance with huge erections go far back into the Upper Paleolithic. But these are not aggressive or misogynistic phallic images. Rather, they seem to represent the phallus serving the goddess, women, and life processes of all. This is really shown in the tradition of goddess phallus stones, with the goddess figure carved on phallic shaped bones or rocks. This phallic form of the goddess is found continuously from the Paleolithic through the Neolithic and into the Proto-Urban period in Mesopotamia. Marija Gimbutas sees these goddess phallus icons deriving from the Old Stone Age as suggesting the androgynous nature of the Great Mother. This is so. They also suggest the potential unity of the sexes in mutual love service before their disastrous splitting apart by patriarchal misogyny and puritanical sex codes. At any rate, from the period of patriarchal cosmological text, circa 4000 through 3000 BC, the serpent comes down to us as a narrowed and pejorative symbol of male sexuality or immoral sex and of evil. The Egyptians believed that from the union of chaos and the wind, the life breath, the all goddess dancing with her own breath, came from Ma'at in the form of an egg. Ma'at was the Egyptian word for both mother and matter. It was the primordial mud of the Nile from which life grew. It also meant truth and justice, and was often symbolized both as a feather and a vulture. The feather weighed in the balanced scales against the soul at death, and the vulture mother who swoops down to pick the dead bones clean for rebirth. Ma'at as the ultimate truth contained within herself, the potential existence and non-existence of all things and polarities. She was also pure nothingness, having no identifiable characteristics but the eternal potency and potential of everything. Yin and Yang within the goddess. Another symbol for this same complex of ideas is the Ouroboros, the serpent curled with its tail and its mouth, forming the perfect circle, or female O, or zero, the cycle of all and of nothing. The continuous eternal wisdom cycle of all coming from nothing and returning to nothing again. The hallucinated dream circle of sleep, waking, and sleep, and who can say which is the dream and which is not? The world egg, yin yang. The ancient great mother of all living gave birth parthenogenetically to herself and the entire cosmos. She was the world egg containing the two halves of all polarities or dualisms, the yin and yang of continuity and change, expansion and contraction of the universe. This process is symbolized by the spiral turning continuously in on itself, by conscious breath waking from sleep and sinking back into sleep, Kali or Uranim dancing the universe into being and then to destruction and death. The ascending spiral is matter transforming into spiritual psychic energy. Simultaneously, from the descending spiral, the materialization of the spirit, comes the differentiation of the whole manifest world. The spiral involution of energy into matter is the primary movement of the universe into created beings. The spiral evolution of matter into energy is the creative movement of these beings, consciously evolving back to their source. Inhaling and exhaling breaths of living cosmos spirals the universe into creation and dissolution. Energy to matter, world to spirit. Radiant energy can be transformed into massive particles and vice versa. The spiral is the symbolic key to immortality or eternal process and is identified with the moon. Ancient as this cosmology is, it remains the most accurate statement of cosmos process yet made. 20th century physicists, using their very different mathematical language, have only been able to confirm these ancient conceptions of how the universe creates and recreates itself. The world egg's two halves were white and black, light and dark, day and night, hot and cold, life and death. It contained within itself all oppositions, but it also stated the union of opposites, as the continuum is contained and synthesized within the spiral. In the Orient, some early time in the millennia before our era, this ideal was formalized in the concept of yin or yang. Yin, or negative principle, originally referred to the dark or shadow side of a mountain. It shared attributes with the earth, moon, and water. Yang, or positive principle, signifying bright banners in the wind, or the light side of a mountain, was linked with the sky, sun, and fire. After several generations of Eastern philosophers, everything became classified under these categories, including the sexes. Yin was female, Yang was male. But this Eastern dualism differed originally from the moralistic dualism of the Christian West. Yin and Yang were not seen as hostile and irreconcilable opposites vying for control over the universe, nor was one good and the other evil. On the contrary, yin and yang constantly complement each other to maintain cosmic harmony. And they are not fixed, static principles, but transform each other and transmute into each other in an ongoing process. Without the eternal movements and interchanges of these forces, life wouldn't exist. Winter, which is yin, changes into summer, which is yang. Both yin and yang can create, both can destroy. The life-giving sun, which can also scorch and kill life, gives way to the dark, barren cold of the earth, in which new life seeds will invisibly germinate. The yin and yang images and conceptual categories are pagan. from the land, since they emerge from close, prolonged experience and observation of natural processes. These processes are not linear but cyclic. Life transmutes into death, which turns into life again in a great revolving wheel. The moon goes through its changes, dies, and is reborn because it circles in a circling cosmos. And so the moon, like the serpent, is the avatar of these processes. The psychic focus is not on the mutual antagonisms, but on the subtle interchanges and permutations, the dance of the polarities. Later, Mandarin philosophers like Confucius, using the yin yang principles to serve the hierarchic politics of the Chinese court and the patriarchal state, emphasizing dominant yang over submissive yin. Earlier Taoists, though, gave full value to the negative force or shadow side, yin, as a creative power equal to the yang. Taoism, a mystic and sexual religious philosophy, originated in ancient Chinese matriarchy, which saw the male as the earth animal and the female as the animal of change or transforming principle. The original I Ching characters for the female and the male principles, the receptive and the creative hexagrams, contain these matrifocal meanings also. As Western alchemists and later Western physicists were to confirm, it is the negative pole that initiates the creative activity of matter. Some physicists theorize that the universe began to organize, gathering shape and motion in the shadow sides of randomly scattered particles. Also, until recently, scientists have assumed that the weight of the universe was in bright stars and speedy particles, but now they have found enormous amounts of dark, cold matter circling the stars and all galactic bodies, and this matter is preponderant and responsible for the quote unquote weight of the universe, which functions as gravity, as they report, and this matter is preponderant and the structure of the whole universe appears to be shaped by the gravity of dark matter. What has been called the dark, the negative, the female, in both the celebratory and the pejorative senses, is now seen to be the original creating and sustaining force of the universe. If the expanding universe is ever to contract again, it will be from the gravity of this dark matter. The corruption of the original yin-yang oracular mystical synthesis into a dualistic system of hierarchy, dominance, and oppression occurred in the East as in the West in the shift of human culture from land tribal to court hierarchic, as in the shift from matrifocal rural to patrifocal urban social structures. In the patriarchal struggle for property and power, the yin-yang equation became a tool, a weapon of inequality and repression, both economic and sexual. Now the yin, as receptive feminine, was interpreted as sexual, intellectual, and spiritual passivity, inferiority, and subordination. Yang, as active masculine, was interpreted as sexual, intellectual, and spiritual aggression, superiority, and dominance. In the West, also, these religiously institutionalized sexual dualisms have created the ideal of heterosexual patriarchal marriage, in which a sexually oppressed and economically dependent wife serves a sexually and economically dominant husband. These concepts are highly political and serve to maintain and justify patriarchy and the subjugation of women. Yin wisdom is scorned by men as irrational weakness, and yang power is used to justify any kind of exploitative action, no matter how unjust and brutal. But these are not the original meanings of these terms. The original meanings apply to the interworkings of rather impersonal and certainly non-domestic forces, much like the negative and positive electrical poles in a battery. As R. Buckminster Fuller put it, energy, when its potential is built to sufficient voltage, must arc over to the dominant negative. The Janandrous Great Mother. In truth, Western Christianity's stereotypes of weak femininity and strong masculinity are among the most extreme in history. Many of these sex role traits originated among the privileged classes, the only people who could afford passive, independent women, and for whom a bored and indulgent lifestyle made sex role playing an amusement. Bound feet among the wives of wealthy Chinese men of the past served the same aesthetic and entertainment function and were a sign of privilege. In the modern West, with its relative economic abundance, many strict sex role traits once indigenous to the wealthy have been passed on via the media to the quote unquote masses. So we see female office workers tottering to the job on spiky high-heeled shoes. Such shoes were once worn only by royalty, by courtiers and their ladies, and were originally devised to be worn by sacred priests to keep their mana from escaping into the ground. One thing, quote unquote, democracy does is spread the silliness around. Unfortunately, with many of the silliest sex roles, people tend to forget their origin and culture and class and believe they come directly from nature or from God. And so we see the silliest of customs enforced with humorless severity and sometimes the most punitive laws. Extremely sex-biased roles are the product of rigid heterosexuality, intellectual dualism, and a labor exploitive culture. They didn't exist in early societies. And many of the sex customs that did exist were just the reverse of ours. For example, among hunting and gathering people worldwide, the home is not only the property of the woman, but is built by her, and if it's portable, carried around on her back when she moves. Among traditional Chinese, the women wore pants, men wore skirts. Among people with Covade customs, the women usually give birth in relative ease while their husbands writhe and howl and grind their teeth. And among the still pagan 12th century Irish, to the horror of their chronicler, Geraldus Cambrensis, it was the females who pissed standing up while the males squatted. With sex roles and customs, it is very hard to make an absolute statement. Women always do this, men exclusively do that, without having it immediately contradicted by some culture, some place, at some time. This is why it's important to know your culture and your people, because not all cultures are going to make sense to you, and they shouldn't. Indeed, the further back one goes in time, the more bisexual or genandrous is the Great Mother. As Charlotte Wolfe says in Love Between Women, perhaps the present day lesbian woman is the closest in character to ancient women. Boo. Excuse me. With their fierce insistence on strength, independence, and integrity of consciousness. Disclaimer: I am a stickler for heterosexual marriage. I am the poster girl for sacred marriage. So if you hear me squirming while reading through this, pay me no mind. So The first love object for both women and men is the mother. But in patriarchy, the son has to reject the mother to be able to dominate the wife as a real man. And the daughter must betray her for the sake of submitting to a man. In matriarchal society, this double burden of biological and spiritual betrayal does not occur. For both women and men, there is a close identification with the collective group of mothers, with Mother Earth and with the cosmic mother. And as psychoanalysts keep repeating, this identification is conducive to bisexuality in both sexes. Here's the heathenry. But homosexuality in tribal or pagan men was not based on rejection of the mother or the female, as is often true in patriarchal culture. Rather, it was based on brother love, brother affinity as sons of the mother. And lesbianism among women was not based on a fear and rejection of men, but on the daughter's desire to reestablish union with the mother and with her own femaleness. You do not got to be gay to be with your mama. Anyway. The collective of mothers identified with by both daughters and sons was made up of strong, creative, productive, sexually free, and visionary women. And so the ideal of womanliness for both sexes was not the enforced and mindless submissiveness of the oppressed as it is in patriarchal culture. In many of the most ancient images of the goddess, she is shown with both breast and phallus as hermaphroditic. Bearded Ishtar. If you pay attention to my videos, we'll see who exactly the bearded Ishtar is. These are a certain type of people. Divine bisexuality stressed her absolute power, especially over her own sexuality, which was a spiritual as well as an emotional physical expression. Male shamans in many primal cultures wore women's clothes and lived like women, often in homosexual relationships. The Neolithic goddess was served in her temples by bisexual or lesbian priestesses and by bisexual or homosexual priests. In the disorder of the late Neolithic, in the transition from matriarchy to patriarchy, eunuch priests served her, men who had castrated themselves in an orgiastic identification with the goddess. One branch of the Essenes, the Shemitic sect with which Jesus was later associated in Qumran on the Dead Sea, served as eunuch priest in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus on the west coast of Turkey. With what we know of this period, men were feeling under extreme pressure to identify either with the ancient Greek mother or with the militant new male gods, and devotion on both sides went to extremes because such acts had become politicized with the rise of patriarchal misogyny, a fantasizing sex phobia new in the world. Creative women and men in all ages have found rigid heterosexuality in conflict with being fully alive and aware on all levels, sexual, psychic, and spiritual, because it is a mental and emotional limitation as well as a physical one. It is as if on all levels of our being, we are split in half, locked into one half, and forbidden the other. We are split against ourselves and against the self in the other by this moralistic opposition of natural polarities in the very depths of our souls. And the result is war, necrophilia, alienation at the root. And if we don't resolve this, we all die of a mutual murder that is total suicide. As Esther Harding says in Women's Mysteries, Ancient and modern woman at the core of her being is cut off from the source of life. With rigidly imposed heterosexual roles, women and men also are emotionally and mentally stunted. Women are also physically stunted. Compare us with statues and reliefs of the Amazons or the huge Celtic warrior women. In ancient Scotland, land of the Picts, who were later invaded by Celts from Northern Ireland, some very mysterious and legendary warrior women lived. They were Amazonian battle fighters and witch shamans, a lesbian bisexual sisterhood entrusted with the guardianship of their tribe's secret powers and visions. According to Jean Marcal in Women of the Celts, all the great Celtic warrior heroes were initiated into the profession of arms and also into the sacred mysteries of sex by these women. The Picts were the naked shock troops of all the Celtic nations. They went into battle, women and men side by side, wearing only their blue body paint, woad, sacred to the Mother Earth. They were called Picts, Indo-European Pake, tattooed, Goidelic, quicked, and Latin pictus, painted, as they decorated their entire bodies with these blue tattoos of all the magic birds, beasts, and fish belonging to the Great Mother. They practiced communal sex rites and sometimes ritual cannibalism. The Celtic women generally were known for their great physical strength and ferocious bravery in battle. Roman historians wrote that among the Gauls, the women were almost as tall as the men and equal in courage. The Teutonic as well as Celtic tribes were often led into battle by warrior queens, and the invading Roman soldiers reportedly feared the fighting women more than their male companions. As Briffault noted again and again, among primitive people not yet contaminated by the physical habits and role playing of civilization, it was common to find the women equal in stature, often larger than the men, with greater musculature and endurance capacities. Among the Stone Age skeletons of Neanderthals, it is often impossible to determine sex by size or weight of bones. Early females and males were almost equal in stature, equally strong. As seen in the most ancient Paleolithic images of the goddess, the solid strength and massiveness of the female body was an ideal. And certainly the human race and earlier hominids couldn't have survived 2 to 3 million years of catastrophic earth changes if females had been as physically weak and mentally dependent during those long, hard ages as we are supposed to be today. Anne Cameron's Daughters of Copper Woman, Stories of Northwest Pacific Indian Women from Vancouver Island, gives us a real picture of the strengths needed by early women. To be fit as mothers, as lovers, food and shelter producers, as wise women, as visionaries, as creators and guardians of a whole people's culture. These females began undergoing rigorous physical training programs long before puberty to develop every strength of mind, of heart, of leg and arm muscle, and of spirit needed by them to be grown women or fully evolved human beings. And so the young women of ancient matriarchal Sparta also developed skill and athletic bodies. When they married, the wedding ceremony included a wrestling match with their new mate. Ain't nobody got time for that. Cro-Magnons Goddess, 1980. In a civilized patriarchal society, on the other hand, a physically underdeveloped, lobotomized, and desexualized woman can live what is called a normal life. Here are the memorable thoughts of the psychosurgeons. Lobotomized women make good housekeepers. It is more socially acceptable to lobotomize women than men because creativity, which the operation totally destroys, is in this society an expendable nullity in women. There is no such thing as a partial liberation. No one can be economically free while sexually repressed and bifurcated. No one can be sexually liberated while an economic slave. No one can enjoy mental freedom while the body's labor and sexuality are exploited and conditioned by oppression. And if we pretend that we can free our spirits while the bodies, minds, and emotions of humanity are still straitened by biopic and exploitive sexual, social, and economic ideologies, we delude ourselves. Freedom is all or nothing, and there is no freedom for males of any class or color or ethnic group, while the female remains unfree. Ancient bisexual women was inventor, scientist, builder, artist, healer, producer of craft and culture, shaman, ecstatic, visionary, warrior, and leader. Okay. Now this is the chapter for bisexual people, I guess. I'm just gonna read it. From now on, I'm just gonna read it and then I'll talk about it after the book. Okay. So, this is our total potential when our life energies are not divided against themselves and against us, blocked and distorted by cultural and religious stereotypes. This is just the beginning of our potential when our energies are able to flow out freely to create the world, as symbolized by the self sustaining power of the Janandra's Great Mother. All right. I am so hungry. Mysteries of the Throne, the Cave, and the Labyrinth. To return to our beginnings, all religion is about the mystery of creation. If the mystery of birth is the origin of religion, it is to the woman that we must look for the phenomenon that first made her aware of the unseen power. Primeval woman, like the animals, probably first knew she was pregnant when she felt the first movement within her at the quickening. She was not aware of the male's part in conception, nor of the moment of inception of pregnancy. Of course, she would notice breast swelling, perhaps nausea. But doubtless she would understand this first quickening movement as the beginning of the process leading to birth. Among people worldwide who believe that a woman is impregnated by the spirits or by the wind, this first movement would be the kinetic announcement of the entrance of the new spirit being into her body. Woman's awe at her capacity to create life is the basis of mystery. Earliest religious images show pregnancy rather than birth and nurturing as the numinous or magical state. Numerous Paleolithic figurines of women representing the pregnant goddess go back over 30,000 years. It is not until the Middle Neolithic, circa 6,000 to 5,000 BC, that figures of the Great Mother holding a child appear. These are fascinating figures from Catalhuyuk and Hassalar in the region of modern Turkey. The first, carved in gray green schist, shows the goddess as two female bodies back to back, one nursing an infant and the other embracing a lover. The Hassalar clay statuette shows a nursing male child with his genitals near the mother's vulva. In both statues, the female is larger than the male. Both show the beginnings within the Great Mother religion of a companion worship of a young male who is both her son and her lover. For many Neolithic centuries, this son/lover of the great goddess is the only thing approaching a male god to be found. And coupled with the mother, it remained a central image in later Near Eastern religions like Isis and the child Horus in Egypt, Mary with both the newborn and the dead Jesus in her arms. In pre-dynastic Egypt, the goddess of the women was Ta'ert, the Great One, who was imaged as a pregnant hippopotamus standing on its hind legs. Figures of Ta'ert are among the earliest Egyptian amulets, and her worship continued until the coming of Christianity, and probably secretly among women for centuries after. Christian and other patriarchal priesthoods have never been any help to women in the great female experiences of menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, and nursing. Clearly, the pregnant goddess of the Cro-Magnon caves, Ta'ert, and later goddesses of pregnancy and birth were shaped out of women's needs and experiences and beliefs. This is the original transformation period, transformation mystery. Primordial birth, in which we struggle alone, facing death and pain in order to create life within the cosmic womb of the unknown. Only women are ever truly alone, as the universe is alone with herself. And birth is the supreme paradox of aloneness. When a woman in sweating and groaning solitude brings forth the continuity of human life, men can only imitate this experience by participating in the goddess mysteries of rebirth in the sacred caves. And in fact, worldwide, men's original rituals were imitations of the female mysteries of menstruation and childbirth. Images of pregnant goddess were also found in the excavations of Tel Haraf during dating from 5000 BC. This goddess is shown sitting on the earth, embodying the earth that belongs to her. In ritual and custom, to sit on something has the symbolic meaning of taking possession. In later matriarchal times, she was the throne. The throne symbolized her lap. The queen came to power by sitting on this lap or womb of the goddess, so becoming one with her power. Among the Ashanti of West Africa, there was a cult of the throne, and giant throne replicas have been found in the Ashanti graves. The Black Goddess was worshipped throughout Ashanti territory. All the great mountains were seen as the goddess sitting on the earth. The mountain was the original throne womb. It combines the symbols of earth, cave, bulk, height, and immortality. In the towering mountain overlooking the land is embodied the enormous strength of the goddess. Throughout Thracian, Macedonian, Greek, and Cretan lands are mountains with huge thrones at their summits, carved laboriously from the rock. These are the empty thrones waiting for the goddess to take her seat. This custom was taken over by later patriarchal kings. To be enthroned is to be empowered to receive the power of the Great Mother and her mandate to rule. This is why Egyptian paintings and statues depict the small mortal king sitting on the throne or lap of the huge goddess Isis. In this way, the king was reborn or made immortal and thereby given the sacred power to rule over the people. He had true power only as her son. The cave, as the womb of the earth goddess, was considered by the ancients to be the repository of mystic influences. In the original cosmology, a cave was the symbol of the whole world, providing passage for the dead and for the rebirth of souls. Many tribal people today still hold the belief that their first mythic ancestors emerged from caverns or mounds in the earth. The cave was the home of our Ice Age ancestors when they were making the transformation from hominids to Homo sapiens. Paleolithic caves were the matrix of internalized consciousness, womb-like, skull-like, tomb-like. Animal souls were believed to live in the dark, echoing caverns. This is where one went to commune with the deepest, most resonant, and awesome powers. The wall paintings of animals and humans in the innermost sanctuaries could be reached only with great difficulty. Along winding paths, narrow ledges, slippery and dangerous passages, often crawling on hands and knees. These were the narrow, winding passages of birth and rebirth. I am the way and the life. This was the primordial revelation of the Great Mother. As G. Rachel Levi observes, get out. Early people conceived the divine body as the road traveled by itself and its seeker. The Great Mother was the body of life. She was also the way that must be traveled to realize life. It was the spiral or labyrinth that the way had to be danced or walked in all the rites of the mother throughout the ages and the world. The way is always connected with a cave or a womb and with a maze-like spiraling entrance and exit. Labyrinths situated at cave entrances are always presided over by a mythical woman. Among ancient Cretans, as among present day Hopis in the American Southwest, the earth womb is depicted as a maze and the mythic place of emergence of the whole people and of the individual soul is called the place of birth or rebirth. Visually, the Cretan maze womb and the Hopi maze womb are identical. In Hindu tradition, both the convolutions of the brain, the convolutions of the brain, and the eightfold stages of the mind, the manas, are identified with the winding spiral form of the labyrinth. Chrome-Lech and the Serpent Goddess. A labyrinth both creates and protects the still center, the heart, allowing entry only to be initiated. Before larger knowledge is revealed, old preconceptions must be dissolved by the psychic and ecstatic re-entry into the original cosmic womb cave of the mother. The pathways between the two worlds were trodden by humans in magic dances and rituals. Perhaps the human collective actually generated as well as absorbed the life forces of the goddess in these rites, since the roads taken by the divine power are themselves currents of energy. Among hunting and gathering peoples, the shamans still go into caves to experience visions, dreams, and spiritual rebirth, and to gain healing powers through resonant communion with the dead. The dead are especially sacred to the goddess since they directly partake of her being, spirits awaiting rebirth through her physical manifestations. The familiar bull roarer, still in use among Aboriginal people, produces the terrible whirring sound of the spiral, the strange whirlwind of passage between the two worlds. Extremely complex ideas were expressed through the symbol of the labyrinth. First, the initiate had to find the way through the underworld, the womb of the mother, going through symbolic death to be reborn again through her on a larger psychic level. Simultaneously, by dancing the winding and unwinding spiral, the initiate reached back to the still heart of cosmos and so immortality in her. The dance would have been combined with sexual rites and the taking of some hallucinogen like the legendary soma. In the resulting illumination, soma and self were experienced as one with the cosmic self and orgasmic ego death. The ecstatic center of the labyrinth was in the no mind center of orgasm experienced as death, creative madness, and loss of the conditioned self. Sexual magic was not practiced for the sake of fertility, especially in early times when no necessary connection was seen between the two. Sexual magic was practiced for the sake of ecstatic self transcendence, a sexual spiritual fusion of the human with the cosmic all. I beg to differ. Prana, or life current, in mystic Indian thought is interrelated with sexual energy and can be directed by breathing techniques. Mind and breath, united and rhythmically directed towards a chosen goal, is the basis for sexual magic. Breath, air, is linked with mind, the creatrix of ideas. They are experienced as identical. The breath prana is used by the yogi to compel the upward surge of Kundalini, the sleeping serpent at the base of the spine, the sexual chakra. Kundalini, the serpent power, is dormant cosmic fire, and she, activated through controlled and concentrated breathing, rises through the six lotuses or body centers, chakras, to unite in the seventh highest center with pure consciousness, samadhi. With this union, liberation is attained, which is true nature and union with cosmic self. Kundalini, the mystic fire, is also expressed sexually as in Tantra Yoga. Here is the awakening of the great magic power, which is Shakti Kundalini, the cosmic movement, which is Shakti, and her movement in the human body, which is Kundalini. Their ultimate union bringing great power, the eternally spiraling serpent force through which is experienced cosmic timelessness. In Tibetan mystery schools, the breath plays a vital part in the process of dying. If consciousness is retained to the last through proper knowledge and concentration, then the breath or soul passes over consciously to the after death of the orgasm. There is similar thought in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, based on the mysteries of Isis and Osiris. Consciousness must be retained to and through the moment of death to enable the soul to take the right path, the way through the underworld. Concentrated unity of the psyche brings release from the power of death. The same method appears in The Secret of the Golden Flower, a Chinese book deriving from ancient matriarchal Taoist ideas. Jungians pay respect to these mystic and symbolic perceptions of ancient peoples, but still fear the female realms. This Western rationalist prejudice and fear distorts Jungian commentary on the timeless ritual transformations of the labyrinth. In all cultures, the labyrinth has the meaning of an entangling and confusing representation of the world of matriarchal consciousness. It can be traversed only by those who are ready for a special initiation into the mysterious world of the collective unconscious. In Indian mystic symbolism, the multiplicity of this world is shown by the interpenetration of the upward male triangles, phallic, and the downward female triangles, vulva, the ascending and descending vortices of creative energy. This vulva image, the descending triangle, which signifies cosmic energy spiraling down into manifestation through matter, is a very ancient symbol. It has been found in Paleolithic caves, inscribed on stone blocks lying face downwards on the ground, and within engraved stone circles in the cavern's depths. Ancient people believed that power resided in images themselves, or rather in the resonance between the image and the thing imaged. And this belief still lives in all of us. Symbols continue to have great power over the human mind and heart. Contemporary hunting and gathering people, such as the Australian Aborigines, maintain connections with mythical ancestors by tracing sacred paintings and dream time maps on the walls of secret caves. We can imagine that ancient women gained cosmic energy by touching and tracing the sacred vulva sign of the great goddess, just as initiates gained the power and insight of ecstatic death and rebirth by tracing and retracing the sacred spirals of the labyrinth, the womb tomb maze of the Great Mother. The cult of the dead. The idea of the living dead can be traced far back also to Paleolithic times, where it existed first among the Neanderthals, who buried their dead wrapped in fetal position, the bodies and skeletons painted red. Neanderthals also set up bear skull shrines deep in their caves. Next came the Cro-Magnons of Western and Southern Europe. They displaced the Neanderthals, but also interbred with them and followed many of the same burial practices. They had a cult of the dead and a cult of the skull, also burying their dead curled up and daubed with red ochre. This ochre painting of bodies and bones with the magic life color of blood or manna was for countless millennia believed to give life to the dead, who were buried lovingly with cherished possessions in the floors of the caves where they had lived. The cave was the womb of the mother, and she who gave birth would also give rebirth. Human religious ideas of death and resurrection go back at least this far. From these burial practices of the Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, we can assume their belief in them as indivisible spiritual entities. Though their material lives were primitive by our standards, in their aesthetic and spiritual iconographies, they are revealed as deeply feeling and evolved beings. They conceived and experienced a union between the divine cosmic cycle, the cycles of animal, plant, and human life, and the recent dead. All ancient and contemporary Aboriginal people conceive death as naturally continuous with life. Perhaps the need for unity and reunion expressed by these ceremonies is a first acknowledgement of a conscious sense of separation in the evolution of human consciousness. At any rate, in the first human religious rites, rebirth, resurrection, reincarnation were believed to occur within the body of the mother as birth, death, and rebirth occur in the great cycles of nature. The further back one goes into ancient cultures, the more the holy enters nearly every phase and activity of life. Being born, giving birth, making pots, digging food, planting seed, making tools, hunting, building a fire. All are acts whose major aspects fall within the sacred sphere. Social groups have magic religious foundations, rites of transition from one life stage to another, required group participation in ritualized expression, all designed to keep the individual's psyche united and in balance while passing through crisis. Death was one of those major life events requiring ritual participation by the group, aimed at reharmonizing the survivors as well as easing the passage of the dead. Even after people left the caves and took up living in small, settled villages, the dead continued to be buried close by. In the matriarchal town of Middle Neolithic Catalhoyuk, generations of the dead were buried under the floors of the homes beneath the sleeping platforms. In this way, they continued to participate in the everyday lives of the living. Their presence was a recognized part of the ongoing life of the matrifocal group, and women shamans performed the death ceremonies. Like magic weavers, they connected the collective dream state in which past, present, and future psychic and physical realities merge with the textured realms of the dead. Drugs such as hallucinogenic mushrooms were used as one means of perceiving the underlying realities of the mystic connection. Funeral rites also always included some form of self wounding, since blood accompanies birth, the moon's cycle, food killing, and other crucial life stages, as well as death. Blood is the physical counterpart of the mysterious terrestrial and cosmic life flows, and so women's transformation mysteries were all blood mysteries. All right, we're going to end it here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Continue to stay tuned. I will be getting back on the radio soon. Hebrew Truth Music Network. It's the Awakening Radio on. You can catch me on Facebook or Blog Talk Radio. I will post it in the somewhere on YouTube when I get ready to do it. But it's been a wonderful night. I will get back with you guys in the morning. Yeah, as well. Again, thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let me know if there's any books that you're interested in reading but don't have the time. I will read it for you if it's interesting. All right. Thanks again. Peace out. Shalom.